Jesus was still speaking when Judas the betrayer came up. He was one of the 12 disciples, and a large mob armed with swords and clubs was with him. They'd been sent by the chief priests and the nation's leaders. Judas had told them ahead of time, "Arrest the man I greet with a kiss." Judas walked straight up to Jesus and said, "Hello, teacher," and then Judas kissed him. Jesus replied, "My friend, why are you here?" The men grabbed Jesus and arrested him. One of Jesus' followers pulled out a sword. He struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. But Jesus told him, "Put your sword away. Anyone who lives by fighting will die by fighting. Don't you know that I could ask my Father, and right away he would send more than 12 armies of angels? But then how could the words of Scripture come true, which say that this must happen?" Jesus turned and said to the mob, "Why do you come with swords and clubs to arrest me like a criminal? Day after day I sat and taught in the temple, and you didn't arrest me."
When I was 19 years old, I went to a football match in London on my own. It was Queen's Park Rangers versus Manchester United, and it was the final game of the season. I sat amongst the QPR fans, and there were 20,000 people watching what was a really good game. But at the end of the match, something happened which really frightened me, terrified me. As the referee blew the final whistle, all the players ran off the pitch, down the tunnel and into the changing room, and as they did so, hundreds and hundreds of Manchester United fans poured off the stands and onto the pitch. Now, to be fair, most of them were there just to have a bit of a good time, to celebrate the fact that they'd won and to celebrate the fact that this was the final game of the season. But quite a lot of them were looking for trouble, and hundreds of them were walking and running towards the stand where I was sitting, and they were wanting to have a fight. And I watched as the front row of people found themselves getting kicked and punched and seriously hurt. And I knew that unless I did something, I was going to be next. As these fans came towards me, I knew I had a decision to make. Either I was going to stand my ground and get ready to fight back and to protect myself, or I was going to have to run away. What the psychologists call the fight or flight response. Well, fortunately, there was a set of steps fairly close to where I was standing, so I jumped up onto the concrete barrier and then down onto the steps about 8 to 10 feet. Then I went down onto the concourse where there was more fighting going on. I ran out of the concourse, out of the ground, down the high street, until eventually I got a mile down the road at Shepherd's Bush tube station. Even when I got there, I ran down the steps onto the platform and onto a train, and it was only as the train pulled away that I realised I was safe and I could relax. I chose to run away from the situation. I think it was probably the right thing to do, and I was kept safe. But the disciples did something similar when Jesus was arrested. The Bible tells us at the end of this passage that the disciples ran away and abandoned Jesus. And who can blame them? They knew that Jesus was about to be arrested. They knew that he was likely to be thrown into prison and possibly tortured. They knew that he would be convicted on trumped-up charges and that perhaps he would be killed. One or two of them were up for a fight. In fact, when they did so, Jesus had to tell them off and say, "Look, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. But I tell you, don't you realise that at a moment's notice I could call upon 12 armies of angels, 12 legions of angels to come and rescue me from this situation?" But then, how would the scriptures be fulfilled, said Jesus? How would all this happen? I find it quite extraordinary that Jesus, at the moment of greatest terror, when he was about to be arrested, about to be taken away, about to be tortured, when he knew that the very next day, for 6 hours, he would bleed and suffocate to death until eventually he did die on his own in the most humiliating and excruciating pain, that when he was given the option of opting out, he chose not to. When he was given the option of fighting his way out of the situation, when he was given the option of escaping the situation, he just stood there and allowed it all to happen. And what's more, moments earlier we read that when Jesus was in the garden praying, "Not my will but yours be done," an angel came to strengthen him. He was in so much distress that he needed an angel's strength. So he accepted the help of an angel to strengthen him through the situation. But when at that moment he could have called upon the angels to help him to escape, he chose not to. Because how else could we be reconciled to God? How else could we be forgiven? Jesus knew that he had to die on that cross in our place so that we might be forgiven, so that we might have a right relationship with God. It couldn't happen any other way. And if Jesus chose another alternative, then we would not know the peace and love and the joy of knowing God. I don't know what kind of love it must have taken for Jesus to have resisted the temptation, to just stand there, but I'm so glad that he did.